So I think it's about time to get a little bit more complex with what we do here in Grasshopper, don't you? Great. In this exercise, I'm going to make an object like the one I have here in Rhino. It starts with a couple of polygons for some faceted curves, and eventually has a bit of a twist here, finally getting into some surfaces. I need to first define this polygon. We're going to learn a couple new components along the way and a few other things about Grasshopper. I'm going to look for this polygon here in curve, primitive, and polygon. Create a polygon with optional rounded edges. We'll start with a polygon. And here we are. Now remember, to read a component and understand what the inputs need, we need to hover over the inputs. So I'm going to hover over the first one here. This is a plane, polygon base plane. Well, we haven't worked with that, but it seems like there's already something defined. So I'm going to move on to the next one, the radius of the polygon. And this is a number. The number of segments, here it's defined 6, so I'm actually creating a hexagon. And we see this new icon, this icon of a hexagon with a 7, that's the icon for an integer. And finally, the polygon corner fillet radius, if we want these corners to be rounded. For now, we'll just start with regular old polygon. And eventually, maybe we want to change some of these parameters, but I'll leave that there. Now, I want to define another one of these, but up in space. What I'll do is perhaps I'm going to draw a point somewhere up in space, and I'll draw the polygon there. So I'm going to go to Vector, Point, Construct Point, and I'll give it a bit of Z. So I'm going to go Params, Input, and Panel. In Z, I'm going to double click there. I'm going to write in 10, click somewhere else on the canvas. I'll resize the panel just a bit, plug that into Z. All right, so I'm going to copy the polygon, and I'll plug this point into P. Notice that here it's asking for a plane, but I've just added a point. As I mentioned, Grasshopper does do some automatic conversion of data types. We'll talk about this more in depth later on. Finally, I want a third polygon somewhere up here, so I'm going to copy this whole thing, and I'll put in here 20. Okay, I have 3 hexagons. Now I want this middle one to rotate a bit. All right, rotation, where do we find that? In the tabs. Here we have a transform tab. This is where you're going to find all sorts of things dealing with moving, rotating, mirroring, scaling, etc. And what I'm looking for is rotation. So I'm going to go to transform, in this case Euclidean, and I see I have all sorts of ways to rotate. I'm just looking for the first one here, rotate an object in a plane. I'll click that and bring it on the canvas, and I'm rotating the middle polygon. So I'm going to plug in from the output P of the polygon to the input G of rotate. Now you see that Grasshopper has made a copy. I have the original polygon and the rotated polygon. In this case, what I would do is I'd actually hide the preview of the original polygon because it just makes it a bit confusing. I'm going to right click in the center and I'll say preview. All right, now we only have one polygon. To make a surface through all of this, we need to use the loft component. So eventually this will be in surface, freeform, and loft. Now in this case, I want them all to be lofted. I'm going to start with the first polygon. Now the loft component cannot make a loft yet because that's only one curve. I'm going to bring in the second one. Aha, my input is replaced, but we remember what we need to do. If we press shift, we can add that connection and we start getting some surfaces. All right, now we're going to add the third connection and we have this strange twisting object. But I feel that our definition could do with some more definition. What I'll do is I'm going to add some groups here. I'm going to group the second bunch of elements, which compose our second polygon, and the third one. I'm going to make sure that my polygon components are lined up, and then my point components are lined up, and my text components. Okay, what if I wanted to add the rotation value? Right now, we've rotated it. I'm not sure exactly what it's been rotated. Here in the rotate component, the second input is the angle. And it says here rotation angle in radians. Yes, Grasshopper uses radians when it looks for something to do with rotation. For now, we're not going to complicate matters too much. Let's go ahead and add something so we can change the rotation. I'm going to move this down just a bit. Because we're dealing with radians, I'm going to look for pi. Here in maths, over in utilities, I have pi. All right. Now it'd be nice if I had a more interactive way to change the value of pi. I could use a panel as we've already seen, or in params input, I have your new friend, the slider. Let's bring that down to the canvas. I'm going to connect the slider to the input of pi, and finally pi to the A input. Now try to change the slider. All right, something a little bit more interactive. Now, because these two elements also make a part of the definition of the second polygon, I want to add these two to our group. I'm going to select them, right click on the group, say add to group. Now they're all in there. There's a few more things that I can do to make this a little bit more explicit. For example, the text here is a little small. I can right click and go to font settings and say sans serif. Just makes it a little bit bolder and change the font type. And I'd say that's a much more explicit definition. It has a little bit of interaction and you can change all sorts of elements.